Hi everyone! Today I want to talk about how I approach reviewing books on my channel. I've seen a few different videos of people recently discussing how they review and what their rating systems are like and what they look for in books, and I know there aren't a ton of you out there who are watching this who are eagerly waiting to know about how I decide to review and rate books, but I think it's a really interesting subject, and I think that as somebody that's making reviews about books, it's something I want to consider, like doing it in a thoughtful way and how I'm approaching it, so it's something that I wanted to talk a little bit about in this video. First of all, in terms of what I review, if you haven't looked at my channel, it's pretty obvious that it is so far completely fantasy and science fiction. I do occasionally read other things. I feel like I probably will read more other things, especially later in the year, but right now that's pretty much what you can expect to see. If I get really sick of fantasy and science fiction at some point, you can probably expect to see some historical fiction, some mysteries, especially historical mysteries, and probably a few classics as well. In terms of how I think about reviewing, I think the first thing I always think about is that I am the daughter of a writer and I'm also an artist myself. For those of you who don't know, I'm a professional musician, so I'm aware of what it's like to put your work out there in the world and what it feels like to get feedback, even at the times where you know you're putting your work in a place where it's invariably going to get feedback. And that can be a really scary and unpleasant thing because the art that you create is really personal. So I'm very aware that authors see reviews and that depending on how popular their book is or how much they like to Google themselves, they might end up seeing the reviews that I make. And while I'm not in this to flatter anybody or to pull any punches, on the other hand, I never want to say anything that would actually hurt somebody because of something I said about their work. So everything that I say, I'm always trying to frame things in a way that I would hopefully feel comfortable saying that to the author's face, even if their work was something that I didn't really like. And also, if it's a book that isn't as well known and there are only a few reviews of it out there, just because I didn't personally enjoy it, I don't want to be the voice that's preventing other people who might love that from potentially picking it up and really enjoying it. I don't want to get in the way of someone's work getting known by a wider audience. I'm not trying to give myself too much credit. I don't think that a ton of people are hanging on my every word, looking at what I say about books to decide what to read, but I also know if I put out something really negative about something because I'm in a bad mood or something like that, that it could end up making somebody else decide not to read it, and that would kind of be a shame. In general, I try to read and review books that I enjoy, and I feel more excited in general to talk about books that I really did enjoy. There have been times where I reviewed things that weren't really for me, especially with my Hugo Awards reading project. There were some books on that list that I said I'm going to read everything on the list and review them, and some of them weren't really to my taste, but I reviewed them anyway because I am also a completionist, I guess. But even with those, I tried to be really clear when I felt like it wasn't something that was to my taste, and it actually made me really happy that there were a few times where people watched my review and said, hey, this sounds really cool, I want to go read this, because some of those books were books where I had explicitly said in the review, I didn't really enjoy this wasn't for me, but here are the things I thought were interesting about it, and here are the things I think it did do well, and people saw that and they were able to say, like, oh, this sounds like something that would work for me. So if I'm able to do a review of a book that I didn't like in such a way that somebody can tell whether or not it interests them, then I think that's a really good thing. So when I do more negative reviews or reviews of books that I didn't enjoy personally, I try to talk about the things that I feel like the book did do well, because it might just be that that those things didn't either redeem the book for me or just wasn't what I was looking for in a book. But if somebody could still watch that and just be not so much like, oh, she liked it, she didn't like it, but rather like get a really good idea of what the book is like. Obviously, it's all getting filtered through my experiences and my opinions, so I don't think it's really possible to be objective when reviewing books. I think it's all based on my opinions and my experiences, and sometimes I hear people do reviews of a book that I love. Maybe they like it too, but they'll say something where I'll be like, oh, you thought that book had a lot of romance? I didn't think the romance subplot was that big a deal in that book compared to some of the other things. So it's really, a lot of how we feel about things is based on just our mood that day or what captured our memory and our attention the most. I just try to be really clear about what I do and don't like in books and what my own preferences are. So even if you haven't watched a ton of my videos and you don't have a good idea of my taste, hopefully you can tell from my reviews whether or not your tastes align with my own. But I would love for people to be able to watch my channel whether or not their tastes line up with mine and just be able to tell from my reviews if it's a book they would like or not. So I guess what I'm saying is I don't think it's possible to be objective, but I do try to be balanced. I try not to just trash books that I don't like. There was one ranty review I did recently. I think luckily it's a book that has been getting a lot of love, so I didn't feel too guilty about sharing the reasons why it didn't work for me. But even then, it was really important to me. I didn't say anything bad about the author. I didn't even really, I don't know if I said anything bad about the book. I talked about the elements in it that bothered me or that didn't work for me personally, but I think I did say that also I could see how those things might work for somebody else. So I guess my goal as a reviewer is just to give you the best idea possible of what the book is like and whether you would be interested in it or not. And yeah, I do try to imagine how would I feel if the author found my review and watched it, if they would feel hurt. I don't want them to feel that way. If they would watch it and be like, oh, she totally misunderstood the point of the book, obviously this wasn't the genre that she liked, or something like that, you know, that's okay. People are allowed to have opinions and authors are publishing their books to be read by people, but I just don't want to ever do anything that's something where someone would just feel like hurt by the things I said about it, if that makes sense. And I guess that's just what I would like as an artist as well. When I work really hard and pour my soul into a project, it's fine if somebody doesn't like it, but I want them to respect what I put into it. And that's how I feel about the books that people write. Also, just to be clear, I'm not a super nice person. I make fun of books in private all the time and say all sorts of things I probably wouldn't say to the author's faces. When I'm talking to my husband or my friends, you know, I'm not like a super kind person about stuff that I read, I don't think. I guess you'd have to ask them. But I think I try to keep like an extra level of cautiousness in terms of how I do reviews because, like I said, I don't want to be mean or hurt anyone's feelings. On the other hand, I'm actually a really picky reader and I'm aware of that. I'm the kind of person, so like one of my really good friends growing up, he and I would always go watch all the science fiction and fantasy movies together in theaters whenever they came out, like whether they were good ones, trashy ones, and then whether or not we liked the movie, on the way home, we would just pick it apart. And I think one time his younger sister was with us and she was like, why do you guys always have to do this? Like it ruins the movie. Can you guys just stop talking about, you know, all the plot holes and everything and the things you didn't like? But both of us, he ended up going into theater. I'm a musician. I think we had this like artist's mind where we wanted to take things apart, see what worked, what didn't. And I think I tend to read books with like big themes and story and structure in mind a lot of the time, and it's just my nature to be really picky and pick things apart. I find it hard to just gush over stuff. I get more interested in like a certain aspect of a book, and that will be what holds my attention, and I might talk about that bigger picture thing super in depth and not go as much into the details. It just depends what gets me excited. So yeah, I think my reviews probably do come across as kind of overly picky and maybe like overly intellectual sometimes, because sometimes that's how I relate to books. But because of that, I also want to be really cautious about letting that pickiness like affect how other people are going to interpret my reviews. So that's why you may have noticed if you've watched my reviews, I don't use any kind of stars or rating system in my video reviews. If you look at my Goodreads, I do rate things on Goodreads. And I did for a while have a personal spreadsheet with my husband and one of our friends. I should go back to that. Actually, I haven't updated it, you know, pretty much since I started this channel. But on that, I was rating books out of 10, including like half ratings, like 8.5 or something. So I found it really much easier to rate out of 10 than out of 5. But for me, I'm the person that will almost never rate anything, whether it's a survey or a book, 10 out of 10. I'm always that like person that rates something 9 out of 10, be like, well, it could always be better. I think the world is split into people who will give something 100% and people like me that are just, you know, just feel like there's always room for improvement. That's probably why I'm a musician. Like, we are known for being complete perfectionists that will just keep working on something. It's never good enough. So I can be a little bit like that about stuff that I read as well. But I know that other people might think my ratings are unnecessarily harsh. I don't want to negatively impact the things I'm reviewing or seem like I liked things less than I did. And also, mood is so subjective that sometimes I change my ratings after I finish reading a book. I might feel really different about it a couple weeks later. So because of this, I talk about certain things in my reviews and I try to give a really clear picture of how I felt about it, but I don't give star ratings in my video reviews. To me, a 5-star book is something I encounter maybe a couple of times a year, and to other people, if they really liked it, they'll give it 5 stars. To me, that's maybe a 4-star book. Like, if I thought, oh yeah, this was great, no real complaints, loved it, that's a 4-star book for me. A 3-star book is like, I basically liked it, I thought it was good, I might or might not recommend it, it was fine. And for me, a 5-star book is a book that's so good that I can't stop talking about it, I don't want it to end, and once I finish reading it, I need to basically immediately want to go back and start reading it again. And I do encounter books like that, but it's maybe a few books a year. So I think that's just really, really picky compared to what some people would call a 5-star book, and I'm aware of that, so that's why I just talk about books, but I do not give them star ratings on YouTube, at least for right now. That could change in the future. I'm not going to hold myself to anything. Maybe next year I will decide to do some fantastically complex number rating system with 16 different categories, and you'll get to hear how I felt about the book in each of those 16 categories, and that's how I'll do things. But for now, I pretty much let things flow a little more freely. There are a few areas that I really like to talk about. I pretty much always talk about world building, and I tend to talk about that first, I've noticed. Whether the world drew me in or not, how good I think it is, that's something that's really important to me in a book. I also talk about character and plot usually, in no particular order. So I think those are elements that I talk about in pretty much every review. And then I'll generally talk about what did or didn't work for me in the book. I think there are very few books where I haven't listed anything that either I didn't like or that I thought somebody else might not like. There have been books where I really loved it, but I could see things that were just clear, like red flags that somebody else might really not like. For example, The Goblin Emperor, which is a book that I adored, but it is a pretty slow-paced book. It's basically a character study, and it has these, really complicated names and lots of characters, and both of those are things that could be just, not right for somebody who only likes books where, a lot of stuff happens, or people that go nuts trying to keep track of complicated names. I would want to make sure that they knew about that before reading the book. So those are things that I try to consider when I'm reviewing. This probably goes without saying, but I think I mentioned earlier, I try to only review books where I at least feel like I have something to say about it. Usually those are books that I liked, or at least thought were really interesting. So if it's something where I just don't feel I have like 7 or 8 minutes at least of stuff to say about it, or sometimes if it's a book that I thought was really good, but then there was just one big thing that made me feel like I didn't want to talk about it, I'll talk about those in my monthly wrap-ups, and usually I'll spend a couple minutes on them. I had an experience like that recently with Mexican Gothic. I was loving the book, but at the end it was just a little bit too much horror for me, and I felt like I didn't want to do a whole review about how this is an awesome book, but my mistake, it said it was going to be horror, and it was. Oops. I didn't really want to do that review. So I tried to give a good synopsis and explanation of the book in my wrap-up, and I think that works. So those are some of the things that I consider when I'm reviewing. I know lots of other people have other approaches to reviewing. I think everyone is just trying to figure out what excites them and what they feel like talking about on camera. So I know some people also really like more negative or ranty reviews. I'm not going to promise I'm never going to do any rants or negative reviews, because sometimes it just feels really good to rant, but if I ever do that again, I will still try to be considerate of the author and how they would feel if they found that review. That's basically how I approach reviewing. I know everybody has their own way of doing this. I think it's because we all read differently and we all think about different things with books, and we all have different things that we get excited to talk about. There are people that I love watching their reviews that have a totally different approach than me, and I hope people like watching my reviews because of the things that I do that are maybe different than other people, as well as the books that I read. So I hope if this is a subject that interests you, or if you just want to know more about how I think about reviewing, I hope this was an interesting video, and thanks so much for watching all the way to the end. Let me know down in the comments how you guys prefer to approach reviewing books, if that's something that you do, and I hope that you'll stick around and watch some of my reviews.